Hey everyone, I've been grappling with something that I need to share. I'm not sure if it's just my mind playing tricks on me or if there's something truly horrific lurking in my past. Either way, I think I might be the monster that killed my sister 17 years ago. Here's my story. The incident. 17 years ago, my sister Emily went missing. She was only 8 years old, and I was 12 at the time. It was a summer evening, and we were playing in the woods behind our house. We used to pretend it was our own magical kingdom, a place where we could escape reality. But on that night, the magic turned dark. Emily disappeared without a trace. Despite an extensive search and countless hours of scouring the woods and surrounding areas, no one could find her. The police eventually called off the search, and as the years went by, the case grew cold. My family moved on, trying to piece together a semblance of normalcy, but the loss never truly left us. The nightmares. For years, I buried the memory of that night deep in my subconscious. I tried to forget, to move on, but then the nightmares began. At first, they were sporadic, fleeting glimpses of shadowy figures and anguished cries. But over time, they became more vivid and terrifying. In my dreams, I'm always in the woods. I hear Emily calling my name, her voice a mix of fear and desperation. I see her face, pale and tear-streaked, as she reaches out for me. And then, I see it, a monstrous figure, cloaked in darkness, with eyes that gleam like burning coals. It moves with an unnatural grace, and when it catches sight of me, its gaze is full of a chilling recognition. The awakening. It wasn't just dreams anymore. I began to notice things in my waking life. Shadows that seemed to move on their own, whispers in the dead of night, and an ever-present feeling of being watched. I felt a growing unease every time I ventured into the woods behind our old house. One evening, I decided to return to the place where Emily vanished. I needed to confront my fears, to see if there was anything I had missed. The woods were just as dense and foreboding as I remembered. I walked deeper than I ever had before, until I stumbled upon a clearing. There, in the center of the clearing, was a large, twisted tree with gnarled branches. The tree was unnervingly familiar, and as I approached, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Carved into the bark were symbols and initials, mine and Emily's. The symbols were crude but unmistakable, as if someone, or something, had marked this place as significant. The discovery. As I stood there, a chilling realization washed over me. I had been having vivid flashbacks of the night Emily disappeared, but they were fragmented and confusing. I began to piece them together and found that there was a recurring theme, a monstrous figure, a shadowy presence, and a deep, gnawing feeling of guilt. I confronted my parents about the night Emily vanished. They had always been evasive about the details, but as I pressed them, I learned something that made my heart sink. My father had always had a dark side, a volatile temper that he kept hidden from us. He had often mentioned feeling a presence in the woods, something that would drive him to fits of rage. The realization. The more I delved into my family's past, the clearer it became. I discovered old family records and letters that suggested my father had been involved in occult practices, attempting to summon entities from another realm. It seemed that these rituals had awakened something in the woods, something that had become attached to our family. I found an old photograph of myself, taken on the night Emily disappeared. In the background, partially obscured by shadows, was a dark figure with glowing eyes. The figure was standing next to me, its presence so eerie that it sent shivers down my spine. I can't shake the feeling that I was somehow connected to the entity, that I might have been used as a vessel for its dark purposes. The nightmares and the strange occurrences around me seem to suggest that the entity still lingers, waiting for its next opportunity. The conclusion. I don't know if I was directly responsible for Emily's death, or if I was merely a pawn in something far darker. But the evidence is stacking up, and the guilt is becoming unbearable. I'm haunted by the thought that I might be the monster in my own nightmares, that I might have played a role in the death of my innocent sister. I'm reaching out to see if anyone has experienced something similar, or if there's any way to find closure. I need to know if there's a way to confront this entity, to break free from its grasp, and to make amends for whatever role I may have played in Emily's tragic fate. If anyone has any advice or insights, please share. I'm desperate for answers. Story 2. Hey everyone, I'm writing this because I'm at my wit's end, and I need to share what's been happening to me. For the past month, I've been living a nightmare where it feels like I've vanished from existence. Everyone around me seems to have forgotten about me, and even my closest family members are acting like I don't exist. Here's what's been going on. The incident. A month ago, I was involved in a car accident. It was a severe collision, and I remember it vividly: metal crumpling, glass shattering, and a blinding flash of light. I was unconscious for a few days, and when I woke up in the hospital, I had a concussion and some broken ribs, but I was otherwise fine. Or so I thought. The doctors told me I was lucky to be alive, but the real shock came when I was discharged and returned home. The disappearance. When I arrived home, things felt off. My wife, Claire, and my son, Jason, were there, but they acted like they had no idea who I was. They looked right through me, as if I were a ghost. I tried to call out to them, but my voice went unheard. They moved about their daily routines, completely oblivious to my presence. At first, I thought they were just in shock, or maybe they needed time to adjust. But as days turned into weeks, it became clear that something was profoundly wrong. I attempted to interact with them, to remind them of our shared memories and experiences, but they seemed to have no recollection of me at all. The isolation. The more I tried to make myself known, the more isolated I felt. I began to reach out to friends and family members, but they, too, acted like I was a stranger. I even went to work, only to find that my office had no record of me ever being employed there. My email and phone contacts were mysteriously erased. Desperate, I tried to seek help. I contacted doctors, psychologists, and even paranormal investigators, hoping to find an explanation for what was happening. No one could offer any answers. It was as if I had been erased from the fabric of reality. The realization. One evening, I sat in my empty house, grappling with the horrifying possibility that I was dead. I revisited the accident in my mind, trying to piece together what had happened. It was then that I realized I hadn't actually seen myself leave the hospital. I had only experienced a blinding light and an overwhelming sense of disorientation. Was it possible that my body had died in the accident, but my consciousness was left behind in some sort of limbo? I started researching cases of people who had experienced similar phenomena, stories of people who felt they had been forgotten, abandoned, or trapped between worlds. Many of these accounts spoke of a veil between the living and the dead, a place where lost souls lingered, unable to move on. The encounter. One night, as I wandered through my house, I saw something strange. A shadowy figure appeared in the corner of my vision, flickering in and out of existence. It was a dark silhouette, and it seemed to be watching me with an air of malevolence. I tried to approach it, but it vanished whenever I got too close. I felt a growing sense of dread and decided to confront this presence. I researched rituals and methods to communicate with entities from beyond and performed a simple séance in my living room. The air grew cold, and a whisper filled the room, saying, "You were not meant to remain." The whisper was followed by a cold, unbearable weight pressing down on me. I felt an overwhelming urge to leave, but my limbs felt frozen, my heart pounding. The entity seemed to be saying that my presence was an anomaly, an error in the natural order. The final act. In my desperation, I made one last attempt to make contact with Claire and Jason. I left a letter explaining everything, hoping that somehow they would read it and understand what had happened. I left it on the kitchen table, hoping it would catch their attention. But when I watched them, they simply ignored the letter, going about their day as if nothing were out of the ordinary. It was as if my efforts were futile. I'm now reaching out to you all, hoping that someone might have an explanation or a way to help me. I'm trapped in this strange limbo, and I can't escape this feeling of being utterly forgotten. Hey everyone, I wanted to provide a final update on my situation. After weeks of feeling like a ghost in my own life, I decided to return to the scene of the accident. I hoped that by confronting the place where everything started, I might find answers and, perhaps, a way to break free from this eerie limbo. Here's what happened. Returning to the scene. I returned to the location of the accident, an isolated stretch of road surrounded by dense forest. The area was just as I remembered it, a winding path with thick trees and uneven pavement. The site had been abandoned since the accident, with no memorial or marker to indicate that anything tragic had occurred there. As I stood at the edge of the road, I tried to recall the exact moment of the collision. I focused on the memories, trying to piece together the fragmented images and sensations from that night. The blinding light, the crushing impact, it all felt like a disjointed dream. The discovery. As I wandered along the road, I noticed something unusual. There was a small, hidden path leading into the woods that I had never seen before. Driven by a sense of urgency, I followed the path, which led me deeper into the forest. The trees seemed to close in around me, their branches twisting into grotesque shapes. Eventually, I reached a clearing with an old, dilapidated cabin. It looked abandoned, with its roof sagging and windows shattered. The sight of it sent a chill down my spine. I couldn't remember ever seeing this cabin before, but something about it felt disturbingly familiar. I entered the cabin cautiously. Inside, I found old, dust-covered furniture and a strange, cold energy permeating the air. On the wall, there were symbols and writings scrawled in what looked like dried blood. The symbols were unsettling, and they matched some of the patterns I had seen in my nightmares. In the center of the room was a large, cracked mirror. As I approached it, I saw a reflection that sent my heart racing. The figure in the mirror was not entirely mine. It was a distorted version of myself, with shadowy, hollow eyes and a menacing presence. The reflection seemed to move independently, mimicking my actions with an eerie delay. The revelation. As I stared at the mirror, a deep, resonant voice filled the cabin. It was the same voice I had heard during my seances, a whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The voice revealed a chilling truth. The accident was not a mere misfortune. It was a gateway, a ritual to bind you to this place. Your existence here is not a punishment but a consequence of a dark pact. The accident was orchestrated to sever your soul from the living world, making you a vessel for the entity that demanded your presence. The voice explained that the entity had been feeding on the anguish of lost souls, using their confusion and despair to strengthen its grip on reality. My presence in this limbo was a result of a failed ritual, a mistake that left me trapped between worlds. The confrontation. Determined to end this nightmare, I confronted the entity through the mirror. I demanded to know how to break free and what had to be done. The entity's reflection twisted and contorted, its eyes burning with malevolent satisfaction. It told me that to free myself, I needed to willingly sever my connection to the earthly realm, to make a sacrifice that would return me to the other side. In a moment of clarity, I realized that my presence was an error that needed to be corrected. I decided to perform a final ritual, one that would release my soul from its bonds. I found instructions in the old writings on the walls and prepared the necessary elements. The final act. As I completed the ritual, I felt a powerful surge of energy around me. The mirror began to crack, and the cabin filled with a blinding light. The entity's presence grew more intense, but I was resolute. I focused on the purpose of the ritual and chanted the final incantation. In a flash of searing light, I felt my consciousness being pulled away. The darkness enveloped me, and I experienced a profound sense of release. The pain, the isolation, and the fear all dissipated as I was drawn into a new realm, a place of tranquility and acceptance. Aftermath. I'm writing this as a final update from beyond, a place where I can finally find peace. If anyone reads this, know that the journey through limbo is a harrowing one, but there is a way out if you are willing to confront the darkness and make the necessary sacrifice. To my family and friends who may read this, I want to say I'm sorry for any pain this has caused. I hope that my passing has brought some resolution, and I wish you all the best in your lives. Thank you to everyone who offered support and advice. Your empathy and understanding meant more to me than you could ever know. Farewell. Story 3. Hey everyone, I need to share something deeply disturbing that's been happening in my life. I hope you'll bear with me as I explain everything that's occurred over the past few weeks. It all started a few weeks ago with my wife, Claire. At first, I thought she was just stressed from work, but her behavior quickly grew alarming. She became increasingly distant, her once lively eyes now vacant and emotionless. Conversations with her were unsettlingly robotic, she spoke in a monotonous tone, and her responses were oddly detached. One evening, I found her standing in the dark living room, staring blankly at the wall. When I asked if she was okay, she turned to me with a cold, unfeeling expression and simply said, "Everything is fine." It was like she was there but not really present. I suggested seeing a therapist, but she dismissed it with a chilling lack of emotion. As if Claire's behavior wasn't disturbing enough, our children, Emily, 8, and Oliver, 6, started acting strangely too. Their once cheerful demeanor turned into something unsettling. They began whispering to each other in hushed tones, and their laughter took on a hollow, eerie quality. One night, I overheard them talking in their room. When I went to check, they stopped abruptly and stared at me with vacant expressions. I asked what they were discussing, and they just exchanged looks before saying, "It's a secret." Their nightmares became frequent, with Emily screaming about shadowy figures and Oliver talking about the voices, telling him to be quiet. I tried to comfort them, but their fear seemed to be beyond my reach. Determined to understand what was happening, I began searching the house. In the attic, I found an old box of family photos and papers. Among them was a peculiar, aged journal. The journal was filled with disturbing entries about entities and shadow beings that could possess people and influence their behavior. There were instructions for a ritual involving a mirror and a chant. The sketch of a dark figure looked disturbingly like Claire. I showed the journal to Claire, hoping it would help. Her reaction was disconcerting. She glanced at it with indifference and dismissed it as old nonsense. Her lack of concern was more frightening than if she had been outright hostile. Last night, Claire returned home with a woman I didn't recognize. She introduced her as Ms. Carter, a friend who was here to help with family matters. Ms. Carter's presence was unsettling. She had an unnervingly calm demeanor and her gaze was fixed and intense. The children seemed to be in a trance around Ms. Carter, their earlier unrest replaced with a disturbing silence. I noticed strange symbols drawn on the basement floor and a heavy, metallic smell in the air. Claire explained that Ms. Carter was helping the family adjust to something she couldn't quite explain. Her explanation only heightened my fear. Desperate for answers, I followed Ms. Carter when she left the house one night. She led me to an old, abandoned church on the outskirts of town. Inside, a group of people gathered around a large, ornate mirror, performing a dark ritual. I overheard them discussing binding the family and preparing for the transition. The mirror was covered in strange symbols, and the participants seemed to be summoning something. Realizing that the entity from the journal was involved, I tried to interrupt, but Ms. Carter and her group turned on me with glowing eyes. They warned me that the transition was already in progress. Returning home, I found the house in disarray. Claire and the kids were missing, and the basement symbols had been scrawled on the walls. I was overwhelmed with dread and confusion. I eventually found Claire and the children in the attic, standing around the mirror that had been brought back from the church. They were chanting in unison, their eyes glazed over. The mirror seemed to pulsate with a dark energy. I realized that the entity was attempting to fully possess my family. In a desperate act, I grabbed a crowbar and smashed the mirror. The moment the glass shattered, a powerful wind swept through the house. The dark energy seemed to dissipate, and Claire and the children collapsed, slowly regaining their senses. The house feels different now, lighter somehow. Claire and the children are recovering and don't remember much of what happened. I'm relieved they're safe, though I'm haunted by the experience. I don't fully understand what happened or why, but I'm grateful that I was able to confront the darkness that took hold of us. If anyone finds themselves in a similar situation, remember that confronting the darkness might be the only way to reclaim your life. Thank you for your support and for listening to my story.